President Obama has told us that he will not raise taxes on middle-class Americans. But does the president have a secret hidden tax agenda? Let's take a look at some recent statements. John Podesta, Bill Clinton's former chief of staff and one of President Obama's regular outside advisors, recently told a Bloomberg News reporter that a value-added tax is, quote, more plausible today than ever, and that, quote, there's going to have to be revenue in this budget. Earlier this week, the Center for American Progress, a liberal think tank, where speakers like Paul Krugman and the same John Podesta once again spoke and all agreed that taxes on everyone will soon have to be raised. Joining me now is Chris Edwards from the Cato Institute. Chris has just launched a new website called downsizinggovernment.org, which shows exactly where and exactly how your taxes are being spent in the various and burdensome federal agencies. Chris is also the author of Global Tax Revolution, The Rise of Tax Competition and the Battle to Defend It. Chris, welcome to Freedom Watch.
Thanks a lot for having me, Judge.
Can the president keep his promise of waging a war in Afghanistan, spending $1 trillion, which will be revenue neutral, on federal health care, and not raising taxes on people who earn $250,000 or less?
Well, look, I mean, Congress can cut spending any time it wants. People often say, yeah, we have $1 trillion deficits here going forward, but gee, we just can't cut spending. Well, of course Congress can cut spending. I mean, at the end of the Cold War, for example, in the early 1990s, we massively cut defense spending. Why? Because members of both parties got together and they agreed we didn't need such a big military budget, and they cut it. Well, you can do that with domestic spending as well. And the purpose of my downsizinggovernment.org website is to go through the budget line by line, point out the agencies that are wasteful and unneeded, and to propose cutting them. So Congress can cut anytime it wants.
But is this realistically likely to happen, Chris? I mean, we just had a presidency of a Republican for 8 years, during the first 6 of which the Congress was controlled by Republicans. This president, George W. Bush, called himself a compassionate conservative, and on many social issues, he truly was a conservative. But he spent money like there was no tomorrow. He probably spent more than almost all of his predecessors combined. He federalized education. He federalized prescription drugs for seniors. He fought a war that a lot of us believe was not only immoral but illegal, and he did it by borrowing money for it. If a Republican president with a Republican Congress can do that, God help us with a self-proclaimed liberal Democrat president and liberal Democrat Congress.
You know, I agree with everything you said, and you know, the overall numbers are in 8 years, President Bush increased the federal budget 68%. President Clinton, over 8 years, increased it less than half of that, only 32%. So you're right about the parties. However, you know, Americans are extremely resistant to tax hikes. We haven't had a tax hike now in, you know, about 16 years. The Republican Party is pretty unified against tax increases. So the battle ahead, the budget battle ahead, is going to be gigantic. It is going to be the biggest budget battle we've ever seen in this country, because the trend of revenues and spending are just on completely different paths here. So, you know, John Podesta's talk about adding a value-added tax in the United States. Boy, that would be a big battle. The United States is the only major industrial country without a VAT. And frankly, you know, vive la différence.
Right.
You know, I think we're a freer, more prosperous country because we don't have a VAT. And I think Americans will ultimately reject a new tax system like a VAT. So it'll be a gigantic battle.
When you say VAT, you're using the acronym for value-added tax. And value-added tax is a fancy word for a sales tax on just about everything under the sun, which our cousins in Europe have reluctantly become accustomed to since World War II.
That's exactly right. The European Common Market in the 60s decided that they would all impose value-added VAT taxes, which are like retail sales taxes. So the average retail sales tax, or VAT, in Europe these days is 20%. So, you know, Europeans go to buy cars or TV sets or food or anything else, they pay 20% on everything. That's on top of all the income taxes they pay. I can't believe that America is going to go down that route. I think that there's going to be a gigantic battle. I think that we will resist tax hikes. I mean, we already see that, President Obama might be able to sneak through some tax hikes on income, on the highest income Americans, which would be bad policy, but, if he has a majority in Congress, he'll probably be able to do that. But, after that, he has made strong promises. He won't hike taxes on the middle class, and I think we're going to hold him to that. I think he's going to have a real difficult time.
We're chatting with Chris Edwards from the Cato Institute. I'm going to let my libertarian hair down for this last question. Does anybody ever argue that taxation is theft, that the fruit of your labors are yours, that at some point it's just plain against the natural law, against common decency and morality for the government to take such a huge portion of everything we work so hard for, and that maybe the government should be financed by user fees? If I want a service from the government, I pay for it. If I don't want a service from the government, I don't owe it anything?
I don't think taxation is theft if it is for the limited constitutional reasons why that we all agreed on in 1787. The defense, the Census Bureau, basic constitutional things. I don't think it's theft, but it sure is theft to take my money and give it to farmers who are wealthier than me or to wealthy corporations. That is theft in my view. But that's not. That's. Let's put that battle aside. I mean, the real issue is most federal spending, in my view, is damaging, it's unfair, and it's unneeded. And it's also, goes against the constitutional grain of federalism. I mean, the founders thought that the federal responsibility should be few and defined because they were very practical men. They knew that it made no sense to centralize spending on things like education and highways in Washington. These ought to be state and local activities.
Chris Edwards from the Cato Institute, thanks for joining us on Freedom Watch.
Thanks a lot, Judge.